Welcome to Starworks Insider. I'm Jessica Freeberg, and today I'm speaking with Taryn Power Greendeer. And Taryn is an activist, she's a mother, she's an educator, she's an actress, and she's just a great human. I'm excited to talk with you today. Thanks for joining me. So you're going to be at this year's StarworksUSA conference in November. And we just want to get to know you before you're there, and we want our audience to have a chance to get to know you a little bit too. So I want to start off with just talking a little bit about just some of the things that you're passionate about, some of the things that you find to be most important to you in your life, and kind of what brought you to be speaking at the Starworks convention. So.
Okay, well, which one should I start with?
Let's just start a little bit with your foundation. Where did you come from? Because I find that really fascinating. Your story intrigues me because you kind of have an LA background. Your parents were actors, very iconic actors in the 40s and 50s. In fact, when I told my mom I was talking to you and I said your dad's name, her eyes lit up. So he was apparently a very handsome gentleman back in the day. So just a little bit about your foundation, where you came from.
Well, I was born in what is now the Scientology building in East LA, East Hollywood. And initially we had a home in Bel Air in LA. And yeah, that was kind of the foundation. I mean, I remember just moments here and there, like the year, I only really lived in that family setting for 3 years. And then my sister and I moved to Mexico City to live with our grandmother. But at some point I remember, and this came up yesterday, I was thinking about this, my early days in court. And I remember we had to go with my mother to court and just sit there while they were determining the estate and the whole thing. And I was about 6 then. So we had a period where we were back in LA, but just temporarily. Then I was thinking about this too, driving here, because I was thinking, I was basically raised by nannies, institutions, boarding schools. My mother was not very hands-on. But she provided for us. I mean, it's like I should do travels with my mom or travels with mommy or something. Because when we would come home from boarding school, we'd always go on these trips, and some of the trips, we should talk about this, because even just the summer of '67, that's a movie in itself. So, yeah, and I have, like, you know, you have these sensory memories. There's the smell of cedar wood that reminded me of our basement in Bel Air. And I actually have a little corner cabinet in my house now in Wisconsin that smells like that, and occasionally I'll just open it and go, and I shut it. It's just a little thing with little tchotchkes in there, but
takes you right back, huh?
Yeah, and there was a smell in my grandmother's house that my sister and I both recognize, and sometimes it's in clothing that was in that house, and we just take it and smell it. I've always been a sniffer of things, but yeah, then. We were going to a boarding school in Mexico, and then my mother basically sent for us. So we were put on a plane, and this was back in 1960. And I remember we went from Mexico City through Canada, and what impressed me most was that they gave us a vaccination in Canada. At the airport, we were unaccompanied minors. And I think, how would that go over today?
Wow, yeah, that wouldn't go over today.
But because I guess we were coming from Mexico, they thought, you know, we could be tainted, or I don't know.
So your dad was Tyrone Power, and can you just tell us a little bit about your dad? his history? Because some of our viewers might not be familiar, like my mom was.
Well, my dad came from a legacy of stage actors from Ireland and England. His father was, and this is the most recent relative because there were others before, but his father was a stage actor, and he then went into silent movies, and then he went into the talkies, and I believe one of his few talkies was The Big Trail, which was John Wayne's first film.
Oh, so cool.
And it is cool other than when you see it and you see what happens to a lot of the animals and you know they didn't have any oversight, then it's hard to watch.
Yeah.
I can't. It's like it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that before, and just you have a real passion for animals and the way that they're treated.
Yeah, I do.
As we all should.
I do, but sometimes I've thought I kind of love them to death sometimes because if an animal is ailing or whatever, till their last breath, I'm there pumping, shooting up saline solution, mouth to mouth. It's like, come on, you can still make it. My 18-year-old cow just died 10 days ago. She went down and we tried everything to get her back up, and she dragged herself into the creek and drowned herself. And that was hard to deal with. Like, you want to help the animal up, but this is a 1,200-pound cow, and you can barely budge her.
Right.
And so, yeah, she was my semi-feral Holstein pet.
Now, did you have pets when you were growing up, too? Probably
The
not
first
so much.
dog I remember in the family was an Afghan hound called Nico. And I remember the last day I saw him, he had come to live in Mexico too, and I remember the tortilla lady showing up at the gate, and she came in and left the door open, and I so wanted a fresh hot tortilla. I followed her to the house, and I remember looking back, seeing the dog leave, and we never saw him again.
Aww.
But I've always had dogs.
Yeah.
And my last dog died last summer.
Oh.
But I've had dogs forever. And usually they're just dogs who literally either jump into my yard or show up in my life, or somebody wants to find a home for. But, you know, I have these ideas of, oh, I'd love that kind of dog, and it doesn't manifest that way. It's usually some random, like, sure, you can come home with me, you know.
Meant to be together.
Yeah, so now I'm down to, I can't believe this, because at the farm that I lived in for 15 years in Wisconsin, we had every type of animal, from guinea pigs to goats to sheep to cows to pigs to cats and dogs and horses and ponies. We had the whole menagerie. And now I'm down to one cat and a heifer.
Oh, gosh.
And that is it. It's like, oh my God.
You might have
and
to
my kids
adopt
are
a
like,
new animal.
good, your vet bills are way too high, you know, keep it down.
Well, it's so fascinating because you come from this background of, you know, initially being in LA, the Bel Air area, and having this really iconic parents. Your mom was an actress too, who was really well known. If I'm remembering correctly, was she one of the first Bond girls?
She was, and she never seems to get much credit for that. It was a black and white for TV made in England, Casino Royale.
Yeah.
And she was the Bond girl in there. And then after that, they started making the movies. I forget if it was From Russia with Love, the first one. I remember going to see that one. When I was in boarding school in England, my grandmother took me. I remember she loved going to the movies. We'd walk into a movie theater in the middle of a movie. It didn't matter. We'd sit through the end, and then we'd watch it all again. And it would, I mean, she was a big fan. But, you know, talking about childhood in Bel Air, one of those sensory memories was playing in the sandbox, making, like, sand castles and using eucalyptus buds. I love the smell of eucalyptus, and I use them to decorate. And I remember expressively singing Home on the Range. And once we made it to Europe, which was for Christmas, and then we stayed on with my mother there and ended up living in Rome. But it's funny because I forgot that year we didn't go back to school. we were basically given instruction in different languages and had a German governess, and were being taught French and Italian. And my mother thought language was very important. I don't remember missing out, like, how come I'm not in school, or where are my friends? I mean, to me, it was just like we were home, and then we'd go to our tutoring and play in the garden, and we were getting ready to go to Italian school, so we had to learn Italian.
Okay.
But, you know, I call it derailment, where I'm talking about something and then I go, but to fill you in, let me tell you, and then I forget what I was initially talking about. So
that happens to all of us.
Yeah.
It'll come back to you.
Yeah, at some point.
So I know your dad passed away when you were quite young. I think, were you 5?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you were mostly with your mom over in Europe, it sounds like, for most of your childhood.
Well, like I say, my mom kind of made sure we had a home. We had great holidays. I mean, it's like, it reminds me of Mame, you know? It was like these crazy trips we'd take with her. But during the school year, from when I was, well, in Mexico it started when I was 7, and then we broke it up going to Europe. But then 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 was an interesting year, but 15, 16, it was all boarding school. And so I had this sort of dual reality where, you know, I'd be in these, you know, in the boarding school you have your, like, everything is accounted for. It's like military. You know, you have so many shirts, so many shoes, you have to polish your shoes, you have to keep everything tidy, hospital corners. I mean, everything was regimented. And then I'd go home and it was like, you know, anything goes, like whatever.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't know, it was like going from one world to the other constantly. And then the young girls, they didn't know my dad, you know, girls my age, and they'd say, "Where's your daddy?" You know, and I'd say, "Well, he died." "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I kept thinking, why are people so sorry? He died.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I kind of, I was 5, and I guess it's the early age where you don't have too many memories yet, but I do remember the day that we went to his funeral after the fact. I remember what I was wearing. I remember that I got the giggles because this little old lady that was about as tall as I was absolutely distraught and crying and sobbing. I'd never seen a grown-up cry like that. And I remember nudging my sister and just like trying to keep it together. I don't know. I don't know if it was because he didn't live with us full time by then or what it was, but I don't remember it being kind of like a tragic, sad. It was just like he died.
Yeah.
And
well,
then,
when you're that young, that becomes your normal. You know, it just, you're so adaptable when you're young like that, that I think that you can adapt to those scenarios faster than if you lose someone at an older age and you were with them for so many years, you know.
And I think it would be different, too, if the dad were in the house and you see him every day and then he goes to work and doesn't come home.
Right. Because that's just a difference in the lifestyle of having parents, too, that first they were divorced, but also they were both working actors. And so they were probably gone quite often for shoots and things like that.
And initially I had an English nanny that I have to tell you, right now I'm writing a radio play with a bunch of friends in Wisconsin. And I've developed this character called Nanny Nanny. Because Nanny Nanny, you know, she used to always repeat, she repeated it like an Eloise 3 times. "The children are dirty, dirty, dirty," you know. And
I like that character already.
Yeah. So Nanny Nanny is based on her, and God, I just derailed again. But I'm sure we'll get back on track.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I forgot to say you're a writer too then, because you just do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, that's why, you know, like when you were asking how do I introduce you, I kind of thought, I have gotten to the place, I think, where what I do doesn't define me. I am just a person, and I do all these things. And the irony of it is, like I was telling you right now, I'm hounded for the weeds in my yard. I'm a professional weeder. That's one of the things that I do for a living. I weed people's organic flower farms.
Do you really?
I mean, I go at it and people are like, oh my God, it's all gone, you know, and I get every single little tiny hair of weeds.
Do you kind of go to like a very peaceful place in yourself when you're weeding? Is that kind of a happy place for you to go do that sort of thing?
I think it's more meditative.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I wouldn't say happy. I hate pulling anything out of the ground. Are you kidding? That's why I don't do it so much in my own yard.
Meditative. That's a difficult word to say. but yes, that word. That I can see that being very, you know, just a repetitive thing.
And also, I have to just, you know, the way I look at it. Someone once said to me, this had to do with killing animals, because we had goats at one time that we had to sell that were going to be butchered, and I was like, ah. And they said, if you eradicate the whole species, that's not so good, but you're not killing the goat. You're killing one of the expressions of goat. And so when I pull weeds even, like I live in town right now, and I have a house with a backyard and a front yard, and I have to kind of work on it. But I have 200 acres in the country, and when I go there, I'm like, yes! Like, do your thing, walnut trees.
Grow,
you know,
weeds.
Yeah, the weeds, you know, they get huge, the bull thistle and everything. And so when I'm weeding in town, I think, there's a place for you, but it's just not here.
Yeah.
You know, go somewhere else.
Oh, that's funny. So as far as, you know, that your childhood experiences are so unique, especially, I mean, listening to it as a girl who grew up in Iowa on a farm, it's very entirely different from what I grew up with. So it's fascinating to hear you had a nanny and did boarding school and all of that. And then your lifestyle now is so, it sounds like it's very different, that you have gone from kind of this Bel Air and then this, you know, international, you know, nannies and boarding schools, and now you're living a very different life. Can you tell me a little bit about just kind of how that happened? How did you get from there to here?
Well, I think in reference even to building the sandcastles, there was something about nature I always felt at home in, and at home with, and a sort of camaraderie, companionship with, and my dream, I know where I was going at one point, was when we moved to Europe. We ended up spending like a month or two, I don't even remember, at the Palace Hotel in St. Moritz. And already at 7, I was organizing myself, and I found a stable nearby, and I made sure that they had my little packed lunch at the hotel, and I would take it, and a cab would take me to the stable, and I'd spend the whole day there. I was in charge of 3 ponies. And it must have left an impression, because, I mean, it was Bambi, Bimbo, and Brownie. And Bambi was a little Shetland, naughty little thing. Bimbo was the middle one, black and white paint little pony. And then the little Brownie was a little bigger, and he was also a little naughty, but Bimbo was my guy. But I would train them all and work with them and ride Bimbo. And somewhere I got, it stuck with me, this dream of living out in the country. Well, I'll get, so 9 years old, I get given an atlas in Italy. It was a big atlas, and there were the countries, and then every other page there were pictures of things in that country, and the Norway one had a log cabin, and I was like, oh. And I actually marked my bedroom, kids' bedroom, and I was already trying to save up to get like plates and dishes, because there were some products in Italy, if you had points you could redeem. I mean, I was all geared up. I just want a farm, a house in the country, a black and white paint horse or pony, something I could jump onto, so not too tall. And I just had this, and it took 22 years of living in LA and finally burning out once I became an adult, that it's a series of things that happened, but that led me to Wisconsin. And when I found that property, it was like it was like my dream came true.
Wow, that's so amazing, because here you are kind of surrounded by, I would consider probably more opulence than you have on your farm now. And as a kid, you even knew that in your heart, your destiny was to be kind of out in the country. It's almost like your spirit knew where it was supposed to be planted even at such a young age.
But it was a struggle.
Yeah.
I was going to say it took the third husband to finally be able to move to the country. No, because my first husband, he was locked into the city, and I was like, can't we just move even out to the beach or somewhere, you know? And he was, no. And then the second husband, again, it was like, not happening. And I kind of thought, well, I don't want to sort of just say I'm going to trade in the husband to go live in the country, but obviously it got to a point of an impasse with us, and then I met my third husband in South Dakota, actually, at a Sundance.
Okay.
And because at that point I was sundancing, and you know, you think Americans don't know their geography. Well, we meet in South Dakota, and he says, I'm from Wisconsin, and I'm like, where's that? I wasn't tuned into American geography.
Yeah, well, you know what you need to know, and you weren't here all the time, right?
So he's like, it's just like 2 states over there. And it was summer, and I remember going to visit, and I was shocked how green it was compared to LA.
It's beautiful. Wisconsin is beautiful.
I mean, to me, it was literally like landing in paradise. And I used to tell friends, if you punched the earth, you could feel the water. It was so moist and lush and full of wildlife. And I was just so impressed. So at the time I was living in LA, and to cut a long story short, I was able to finally pull out of LA, and much to my kids' shock and awe, because I mean, they went from living in LA to living in Amish country.
Yes.
But I did get a satellite dish, because I figured at least that would entertain them a little bit and keep them connected, because they were a little bit like shell-shocked.
They're like, what are you doing to us, Mom?
But I think they've since appreciated it a lot.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. So you did the LA scene for quite a while.
Yeah.
I know you had some movies when you were there that were kind of big.
Well, there's one, and they still show it occasionally. It was the biggest commercial one I did. It was an American production, Columbia Pictures, but they shot it in Europe, and they had an office in London, so they wrote it off as a foreign production. So we never see any royalties on that one.
You're kidding.
Nothing.
Oh, that's not right.
No,
Is that
isn't right.
The Count of Monte Cristo or the
Crisco? That should be the new version.
I'm a farm girl. We already established this when we were eating, and I was talking about rabbits going to the bathroom.
I had a guinea pig, by the way, similar pellets.
So yeah, we're going to derail, but so that one, or was it the Sinbad one that you're talking about?
The Sinbad one. Yeah, the Sinbad one. And it's a shame. I've even actually thought maybe we could work on this together. I thought, now, you know, I was listening to a radio show about the latest big trend are superheroes. That's what apparently are the blockbusters now.
Everyone likes those.
How about Dione, my character from Sinbad? 40 years later, she's now the one who has the power, not her dad.
I like it.
I love it.
I love it,
I think it would be an amazing idea, right?
When we wrap here, we might have to talk about it.
Yes.
So you get to Wisconsin, you marry your third husband, and I want to go back to the sundancing thing. What took you to doing that? Can you tell us a little bit about what sundancing is for those who might not be familiar with it, and what took you to that place where you were doing that in South Dakota?
Well, I think I can remember thinking back. I was raised Roman Catholic, but I remember even questioning when I was like 6, 7 years old, like, you know, you're ready for your first communion, you're that age, and they're saying, repent for your sins. And you're like, what sins?
Yeah.
Like, well, you're going to be damned forever anyway, but give it a shot, you know. And I was so confused with that whole religious thing.
Yeah.
And it started a journey of searching for the meaning of life, basically.
Yeah.
And that's been that's been my kind of like the carrot at the end. I mean, I'm just constantly trying to figure out what the hell, what's this all about? Why are we even here? What are we doing, and where are we going? And what is going on with the world right now? What is this chaos? Like, what's going? It's like, are people losing their minds? I mean, I think, can we all just put our guns down and be done, and just try and create heaven on earth instead? So I tried all sorts of different disciplines.
Yeah.
You know, primal scream, meditation, chanting, and then there was a moment where I used to go visit Swami Muktananda in Santa Monica when I lived in LA. They had where every day he'd bless you. And the idea was to get Shaktipad from him, which is like something to kind of boost your like awakening.
Okay.
And it would happen if he thought of you, looked at you, or, you know. And at the time I was nursing my daughter, who was about 3 then. And I'd sit in the front. And one time I was told, you can't nurse here. And I'm like, what? So I sent a note to him through his secretary asking if I could nurse. And he responded, yeah, just be discreet.
Yeah.
So I was like, yes, he focused on me. Now I got the Shaktipat.
Yes.
You know. But then I thought, wait a minute, why are we always looking to the east?
Mm-hmm.
There got to be some wise men on this Turtle Island here. You know, what about some Native American, maybe medicine man, possibly? I don't know. I was not really tuned into what was happening in that world.
Mm-hmm.
So then I started tuning in and going to meetings and groups and circles, and as life was proceeding, and I was now married with my second husband, having a lot of problems, and a friend of mine one day said to me, you know where I was this summer? And I'm like, no. She goes, I went to a Sundance. Oh my God. And I'm like, tell me, you know. And she was like, I don't know, I can't really talk about it. And so I had to go to the bookshop and look for books and read about it. And
Was it just because it was so emotional for her? She couldn't
talk
about it?
You know, these are kind of things where I know among the certain Native people or Indigenous people, First Nation people, a lot of them, they really don't want to discuss it, and I think it was out of maybe protection at one time from the government, from knowing what they do. And because even where I live now, they still practice their religious ways that they've been forever, their traditional ways, and they do it in, you know, in the woods. They do it like, but even that, they're not allowed to divulge what really goes on or the dynamics behind it to those who are not part of that circle.
Okay, that's fascinating.
So the thing with the Sundance, what happened is she told me about it. I looked into it, and she said to me once, are you ready for a change, a total transformation? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
So I prepared for a year, and the following year I went with her.
So what is preparing?
Well, preparing in the sense of knowing that's where I was going to go, and
mentally.
Yeah, mentally, and I mean, I was still living in LA, dealing with 3 young kids, shuffling them around, doing all that stuff that you do as a mother. But I'd already kind of figured, I'm going and I'm going to do this, and my life will be transformed because I need something badly. I just felt like I kept hitting a brick wall, like I couldn't go anywhere. So, so where were we at this point?
You were getting ready to go to the Sundance.
Oh yeah. So we get there, and because no one had really shared much of anything other than make sure you have fabric to make a dress, so I'd made this dress, and make sure you have certain things, but they didn't tell me the extent of it. And I remember getting there and going to the medicine man and offering him tobacco and saying, I want a Sundance. And he said, do you have a chanupa, a pipe? And I said, no. Well, you need a pipe. Anyway, my friend who was like the go-between, who was like his assistant, the very next day he drove to Pipestone, Minnesota, and got a piece of pipe. They made me a bowl. They made me a stem.
Okay.
I got gifted a chanupa, and that's like a very integral part of their whole, I would say, spiritual, religious ways you use that to pray with.
Okay.
And I had no idea what I was getting into. None. I just said, I want to do this because I feel I need to do this. And so then you had 4 days of preparation and then 4 days of the sun dancing, where you basically, you're fasting. And this is like July in South Dakota in the open range. But there's this arbor where mostly the people supporting stay, and you're inside the arbor. Okay. And as part of the preparation, a tree is cut down. And I know this is sort of like, let's speed it up here.
No,
you know?
I think you're fine.
So,
this is really interesting.
And the tree is brought ceremonially to the location where the sun dance is going to happen, and a hole is dug, and the tree is put in the hole and put up. Now, apparently, in the past, they often used a live tree, but this is how I've seen it done now. But before the tree goes up, people are making prayer ties and prayer bundles. They're called flags, where you put a whole bunch of tobacco in the fabric and tie it, and they're different colors symbolizing different directions, different reasons, you know, different animals, different... So before the tree is put back up in the hole, everyone ties these prayer ties. And sometimes you have to make very little ones that get strung into this long string, and they're wrapped around the trunk of the tree. And by the time the tree goes up, it's like, it reminded me in a way of almost like Christmas in July.
Yeah.
And all these prayers are flying around. And
that's beautiful. And
then the dance starts, and basically from sunup to sundown, you dance in a very kind of, there's a certain way, you know, and the idea is to pray constantly for the 4 days. That's the idea, to pray for whatever it is you want to pray for, but just focus on prayer and fast and just keep dancing, you know, and piercing. The men typically pierce in the chest here, and they pierce them with either buffalo horn and then they attach themselves to the tree.
Oh my goodness.
And they dance for as many days as they've committed to dance, and when their commitment's over, they break from the tree by going back and pop them out. And the idea, I believe, was that women naturally bleed. But men don't.
Right. And
someone at one point was given a dream that this is a way for the men to give of their flesh.
Yes, I've actually heard that before. And so this whole journey, this was your first experience with the Native American religion or the culture that
Well, it wasn't the first. It's interesting because I remember being 13 in London, going to Harrods to buy a pipe and tobacco, and sitting in a circle at the Dorchester Hotel. I don't know what I was doing. Maybe I saw something in a movie. Maybe it was from a past. I don't know. But I had this thing about smoking the peace pipe together. And this was, in a hotel in London.
So you almost said past lives. Do you believe in past lives?
Well, I was raised with that belief.
Okay.
I was raised with clairvoyancy. I think I was basically raised with open-mindedness.
I like that, yeah.
So I mean, I have found over time I'm always, the relativity of life just blows my mind. Where one country, God forbid you eat your food with your hands. The other one, you better belch after the meal or it doesn't show that you really appreciated that, you know? And when people say, this is how it's done, and I'm like, I beg to differ because it's relative.
Right, and it's so cool because you've had so many experiences in multiple cultures. You were just raised with the real awareness of the diversity of the world. Really, I think that's fascinating. But I know as you were talking about like your desire to live in that cabin as a little kid, and then now you're talking about smoking the peace pipe. In my brain, I'm like, I wonder if she was in a past life a pioneer or a native of the country in North America.
I think it was probably more. I mean, you know, it's even hard to talk about it seriously, but. The thought I have of being on the plains with a paint horse and just me and my horse. It's like, I don't know, I mean, I didn't plan this. It's just, when I think that image, it's just like, and a psychic healer once said to me, that water is gone since under the bridge, you gotta be in the now.
Right, yeah.
Because I'm always just like, I wish we could go back.
Yeah, I get goosebumps when you're talking about it because it does. It feels like your spiritual journey has brought you to kind of right where you are and almost to the place where maybe you have been before, you know, and that's why you feel so comfortable there. And that's what led you there. I mean, it's so interesting to hear this little girl from Bel Air, you know, now she's in Wisconsin and you're so settled there, and it sounds really like your soul is where it's supposed to be.
Well, I'm sort of settled. Like I was saying, the judge at the municipal court last night was suggesting maybe I should find somewhere else to live because it seems to be that I'm a pain to the city because I like a semi-wild garden.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just like...
I'm going to be laughing about that for days.
Yeah, but I got to go deal with it. I got to go back and get all my info together. I mean, there's a whole bunch of us who are kind of in the same thing, that we're called the alternatives. Then there's the established people who've been there who are like, you got hollyhock, sticky flowers, and it's like, they're beautiful.
Oh, I can't imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, the fact that they had milkweed on their noxious weed list.
That just makes me sad.
Daisies, black-eyed Susans.
That's crazy.
We got them off the list now, though. But now the four big offenders are Canada thistle, bull thistle, giant ragweed, and common ragweed. Those, because the other four are poisonous things that we just don't have.
Yeah.
But it took years of fighting and appealing to the city council and showing them evidence that those other plants are not noxious.
Right.
It's just a personal aesthetic.
Can you tell me a little bit about where you're living now? Are you in a community of other people that I know you said the name of the tribe or the group?
Ho-Chunk.
Ho-Chunk. And is that primarily who lives in the area where you're at now?
No, there's very few.
Okay.
In fact, I think there's like 2, maybe. My daughter and one of my husband's cousins who live in the Viroqua area. I don't know, there might be one other person, but Ho-Chunk Native people are not, at least from Wisconsin, they're not reservation.
Okay.
They were given homesteads. And so I call it the Indian Corridor, but it goes from like the Dells to Black River Falls especially. And that's like, you know, the hotel, the casinos, the things, and a lot of communities that are predominantly Ho-Chunk.
Okay. And you really have settled into that philosophy of your spirituality is kind of rooted in that culture.
I don't know about so much anymore because, you know, life goes on.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I got a hug from Amma, and she gave me a mantra to work on. for a particular trait that I was really wanting to work on. And so I was given this mantra, and I work with a mala, and so I do that. I think right now for me, the Native American aspect comes in more with my communion with nature.
Yeah.
Because I find that to be really a solitary venture.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I just stand by myself at night looking at the stars, or I take a walk in the woods by myself, or I go for a swim in the creek by myself, and all I have around me is nature. It's like I just feel like I'm in my element.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit too about now UFOs and extraterrestrial experiences. And what is your background with that? That's one of the big things that will be going on at this conference. And where does that connect with you?
Well, you know, when Paola, who's organizing the conference, first asked me, I was like, I'm not a speaker. I'm not an authority. I don't profess to be. And she's like, don't worry about it. I'll just interview you on stage. And I'm like, okay. But what happened was with that topic, if I go back, I'm trying to think back when it was, because like I say, to me, I always looked up. I always was like, whoa, especially when you're like in a place where you can see beyond the Milky Way. I mean, it's like mind-boggling. But let me see, what happened first? Okay, so in Hollywood, blah, 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 and I meet different people, and I met Shirley MacLaine, and then I came across some of her books, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Have you ever read any of her books?
No.
Her whole experiences in Peru with UFOs, and you know, it basically it opened. It was sort of like it kind of opened up a window to this. Like, oh, okay, and I started reading, and one of the things I remember that impressed me was that she said that they come in their ships behind storm clouds. So as I'm reading this, I'm visiting my sister in the south of Italy. I have, at the time, my 3 older kids, and they're like 4, 5, and 10 or something. There were the cousins, and there were 4 of them, and so there was this lineup of cousins going from like 4 years to like 18 or something. And I don't know why, but I said to them one night, I said, shall we see if we can call them? Let's go sit on the terrace outside. And it was way down south, off, like almost off the grid. It was so dark and beautiful. And so we all sat on this patio, and it's just me and the kids. There were no other adults who wanted to participate, but the kids were game. So we sat there, and we were like, yeah, come to us. Come. Nothing. We're like, oh, come on. Nothing. And it was a beautiful starry night. And, oh, well, it's getting kind of late. The kids were tired. Okay, I'm going to bed. And I remember as I got up to leave, I looked over the woods that they had there, and I could see lightning. And I thought, oh, that's cool. Anyway, I went to the little guest house. Well, woke up in the middle of the night. All hell was breaking loose. It was like the storm of all storms, lightning, whatever. It blew out the generator for the house. The electric gates wouldn't work. They said it was one of the worst storms that had ever happened. And a little boy who, little fill-in, my sister and her husband had developed little apartments on their property in the south of Italy for the Americans from the Air Force Base.
Oh, okay.
So my son had befriended a little boy who wanted to spend the night in our little guest house. And in the morning, when I got up, and everyone was like, what the heck was that all about, that storm? And he said, yeah, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I could see the lightning, and suddenly there was this being there. It was like shining and silvery, like in front of me.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm like, what? And it was sort of like, whoa. And it was just, it kind of just, we never really went on and on about it. I just thought, wow, that's really interesting. flash forward a couple of years later, I go back to visit, and my niece, my oldest, my sister's oldest daughter, and she at the time was, I think, 21 or something, and she and I had a very close relationship. She used to think that I even looked more like her mom than her mom did, that kind of, and she would confide in me things, her dreams and hopes and things, and she said, I got to tell you something. She said, I haven't told anybody else, but you'd understand, otherwise they're going to think I'm nuts. I said, what is it? And she said, I was in my room one day, evening, whatever, and suddenly this little thing came in from the window, and it hovered in front of me. And I said, well, what did it look like? And she drew it for me, and it looked like a 3-pronged plug.
Oh, wow.
And it came and it hovered, and then it zipped out. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I don't know what to say. It was like, it's not like I say, it's not like I have a lot of, I haven't done in-depth studies or whatever. It's more kind of like a feeling thing. And when she said that, I was like, wow. But she hadn't told anybody else. Well, we ended up going back to the States, whatever, and then she's 23, we meet up in Florida with the whole family, and she was having some troubling times at that point. She was beginning to feel the injustices of the world, because she'd also been raised with many silver spoons in her mouth, and suddenly she was becoming aware of the other people who don't have it so good, and she was really troubled about it. And we met up there in Florida to visit my aunt, my dad's sister, who lived there, and then we dispersed, and that was like in the summer. Flash forward, in the winter, she went back to the States from Italy and was in New Orleans. And one day my sister calls me and says, have you heard from Elenia? And I go, no. Oh, okay, well, if you hear from her, give us a call. You know, we haven't heard from her. She usually calls every day. Okay. A few days go by. Have you heard from her? No. Well, basically, she ended up disappearing. She's never reappeared since. She's never been found, not a trace, not a shoe, not a tooth, nothing. She just disappeared. Now, yeah, you could think, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be whatever. And then as time went by, the more I thought of it, I thought, or she could have been abducted. I mean, she had some little encounter there in her room. I don't know if they were checking her out, or I don't know those technicalities of the whole deal. All I know is that something resonated with me when I started looking into it, and I'd go to MUFON meetings in California, and it was sort of like just part of my life, but it wasn't the sole focus, but it was beginning to kind of, it's sort of like, again, you're going down a dark hallway and you see this light and you go, what's in there? Right. And then you go, oh my God. And then you start looking more and more, and some of the stuff initially I was like, I was never a science fiction fan because I don't like fiction. But when I discovered it was actually more science fact. Right. Now I'm riveted. Yes. Now it's like, if like last night after the court thing, I was just like, I didn't know, and it was late. There was really hardly anyone to talk to. My daughter had gone out, and I was just like, ah. So I turned on David Wilcock and start watching him, and it was like, oh, this is, he does call himself an entertainer. It was entertaining, but also fulfilling. Yeah. So, and there's something about it that I feel like I've, at this point, listened to Paul Hellyer and Stephen Greer, and there's just like, I just, and then in talking with people, obviously some people are like, yeah, whatever. And I don't care anymore. Right. It's like, you can think what you want. I have looked into the eyes of these people who are disclosing these things, and it's irrefutable. Right. So now the whole point is, so now what? What's next? It's like, okay. And everything takes on a whole other perspective, too, when you consider that.
Yeah. Are you, in your scene, when you go to these meetings and you talk about other people's experiences, are you feeling some connection with what happened with your niece then? You're feeling...
Well, I do have what I felt at one point, and I expressed actually on national television in Spain, because they had a whole show about the disappearance of my niece,
Yeah.
because they're big fans of my sister and her husband. I went on there to say that, I said it's not a probability, but it's a possibility that she was abducted. And who
knows?
Who knows?
Right.
But it's possible. Not necessarily like, oh yeah, definitely, because we have no proof, but poof, she just disappeared.
Yeah.
Now, you know, now we know there's a lot of human trafficking and all that, but I also have been watching Linda Moulton Howe's videos and about also the cow stuff, and you know, and having had also cows at my farm, and one time finding one down, a young one in the field, and wondering what happened, and she had something stuck in her throat.
Oh my goodness.
It's like,
yeah,
yeah, we're kind of in the middle of nowhere out there in Amish country. We're surrounded with Amish. There's hardly any electricity, or the vibe is really, you hear the wind in the trees mostly, which I like.
So you think you might have had another encounter with the cow and a UFO or some sort of an
well, after, you know,
unexplained...
again, it's sort of like when it first happens, you're going, what happened?
Yeah.
How did that stick end up down her throat? Like perfectly healthy young heifer, and there she is dead in the field. Like, and then, you know, you start listening to things and go, wait, good. I know they're apparently fascinated with the alimentary canal, so I don't know. I didn't witness it. But I saw the dead animal. So I don't, you know.
Interesting.
And this is sort of how a lot of it is for me. It's like, I even was telling Paola, you know, this isn't my little niche. It's not my corner of expertise. I haven't read volumes of things or whatever. I would say every day I do expose myself to some information, but it's more really a resonance, and to tie it together too with the native viewpoint. I can't speak for all tribes because I haven't had much connection with them.
Yeah.
But the ones I have, there is always a connection to the star people.
Okay. And that's one of the things too. What, you know, when we're talking about, I feel like you've been very opened up, your mind has been very opened up to just the thought that we are more than just this physical being. And I think that's a big piece of it too, is this consciousness of ourselves and what we are beyond the shell, you know, and it just seems like that's really resonated with you spiritually, but then that there's more out there. You know, we have this physical shell, but there are other shells that maybe we're not completely aware of that are maybe more aware of us sometimes, I think.
Right. And it's, I don't know, it's really hard to sometimes kind of get a grip on it, because you hear a lot of stories.
Yeah.
And then you hear like the good news and the bad news and the in-between news, and you kind of trying to figure out friend or foe, like what's going on.
Yeah.
And are you one of them? Like, I don't know. Could I be one of them? Ooh, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Possibly. I've sometimes thought I might be, just because I feel like I'm always questioning everybody's point of view. Like I go, that's not necessarily so. It's like I almost feel like I don't really fit in anywhere, but I kind of fit in everywhere.
Yeah, I can relate to that feeling.
But were it to be, that would be amazing. But I'm looking out. I mean, I look out and I try and see if I can recognize any Nordics or
Yeah.
Some.
Well, you keep saying you're not an expert. You know, why do we want to hear from you at this convention? But I think you bring something really special to the conversation, because you don't have to be an expert to have experiences. You just have to be open to sharing them. And that's such a big thing, I think, in this community, is just us talking about this stuff. And, you know, you say your niece had an experience and she was afraid to tell anyone. Well, having these conventions and conferences and the MUFON meetings and things, it just, you're helping to open up dialogue and making it less scary to discuss it, and that's so important.
And as you're talking, and you know how images come in your head, whatever,
Yeah.
and sometimes you follow it, and sometimes you go, go away. But it made me think of, okay, so I started university when I was 17 and dropped out because I couldn't deal with papers. I couldn't write. It was like, and at the time it was like 5,000 words, and it's like I have to count them now too. It's like, So anyway, I took all incompletes, and I didn't go back to school till I went to UW La Crosse in 2001. When my youngest started school, I decided I would go and get a degree, and I did. And one summer, I remember I was studying earth science, and I was commuting from the farm to La Crosse, which was about an hour, beautiful drive. I didn't mind it at all. But I remember one night going home, and I had laundry on the wash line. I love wash lines. I love laundry on wash lines. To me, it's like an image. It's like, just, it's like a paint horse, laundry lines. I love laundry lines. Anyway, I remember thinking before the dew sets in, I better go get it, and it was late at night. And I think I had Stella on my back, so she was pretty young. Maybe she was just with me. But I went to get the laundry off the laundry line, and I looked up, and I was like, and there was what looked like, it looked like a portal. It was light. It was like yellow, pink, and blue shining down with a hole in the middle. And I remember Stella saying, "That's the most beautiful thing I ever seen." And we just stood there like, I thought, are those northern lights? What is that? You know, and I asked the professor the next day, but he was saying, yeah, some northern lights are being seen in the horizon, whatever. And I thought, well, this was right above me. This was like a, and tying in with that, I have to just share that I also did the Vision Quest in South Dakota, 4 days on the hill by myself, praying for humanity, basically. And when they brought me down, you're not supposed to look anyone in the eye until you go through the sweat lodge, just to kind of smudge, not a full like sweat lodge with the door closed and the, like all the prayers, but it's just like a kind of go through that before you come back out into the world of people again. And at that point, I hadn't had any water or food for 4 days, and again, I mean, this was South Dakota, and I forget if it was late spring or whatever, but they brought me down all covered, and I go into the lodge, and by then I was already with my third husband, who was taking care of the fire outside for the sweat lodge. And I came out, and I saw him, and I went over to give him a hug, and I collapsed.
Oh, gosh.
From their point of view, I just dropped, and the medicine man said I was heading out. In the meantime, my then husband was saying some Indian prayers to bring me back. But from my perspective, I went into like an iris of crystals. Oh, wow. And I was just like, it reminded me of that hole. But it was crystals. And I remember hearing, go to the light, go to the light. And I was just like, you know, where you just like, you want to go in to the light. And it was all these crystals. It was beautiful. I was so like, it was like, oh, you know. And in the meantime, they're freaking out. And I'm at this point leaning up against the medicine man's son's legs, and I'm on the ground. And I remember coming to, and they're all like, you know, and I remember saying, where's the party? I was just like, I was so blissed out.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, that wasn't so bad. You know, I think I'll be ready. So that wasn't horrible.
What an experience. And
Yeah.
you've had a lot of fascinating experiences, and it's been fun to touch on just a few of the things that the people who attend the conference will get to hear about, and I'm sure there will be lots more that will come up in your conversations. But thank you for talking with me today. And
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
yeah, this has been a lot of fun.
Do you know what I've thought of a new response actually for when people say you're welcome or whatever?
Yeah.
Like if I say, like you say thank you and I'm like, you know, it's my pleasure. The pleasure is equally mine. I think that puts us kind of on the same thing, that I
Yes.
recognize your pleasure in this,
Yes.
but it's equally my pleasure.
Yes, and this really has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all of you for joining us for this interview and for sharing our conversations. You can join Taryn along with Emery Smith, Ricardo Gonzalez, Grant Cameron, and 14 other speakers at this year's Starworks USA Symposium, Return of the Star People, November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th at the Aquarius Casino Resort in Laughlin, Nevada. For more information, visit StarworksUSA.com.